rent strikes are fairly rare where the tenants are refusing to pay their rent, but it is happening, for example, in two Toronto neighborhoods. One of the buildings involved in this is at 33 King Street. About half of the tenants in that building are taking part in the strike, and Sharlene Henry is one of them. She joins us from her apartment, where she's also the chair of her building's Tenants Association. Thank you very much for joining us, Sharlene.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start by you explaining to our audience why you and others are refusing to pay rent.
Well, we're officially a tenant association, I'd say, in 2018, when we had several above guideline increases at us from our landlord at the time. And we became an official tenant association, started having meetings, and I'm trying to fight back at the landlord-tenant board against the above guideline increases that we felt were unfair to us as tenants in the building. Above guideline increases, AGIs, as we all call them here at 33 King, are for capital expenditures on the building, things like roof renovations, elevators, modifications to your hallway, your lobby, and piping and different things in the building. So by 2018, we had about 3 of them, and we were frustrated and fed up with that situation, and decided that we would start a tenant association educating ourselves. And I'll be honest, our 2018 above guideline increase, which was a very big one for our parking garage that we share with our sister building at 22 John, took until 2022 to be complete. I understand COVID happened. We all know that. And there were changes in our world, but there was already a backup in 2018, and we knew it would take a long time for them to see or hear our case. So we started to organize ourselves in our building with the help of the York Southwestern Tenant Union, which is about 13 buildings in our area here in Toronto that come together to face problems in their buildings and above guideline increases. So in 2022, when we finally...
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah. I just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
In 2022, when we finally got the notice that we've had a hearing, we went hard and organized some grassroots organizing to let our landlord know what we felt, and that we did not want the increases. We phone zapped our CEO of Dream Incorporated. We had a protest in front of our building. We marched on Weston Road to our MP's office, Minister Ahmad Hussein, who happens to be the Minister of Housing in Ottawa, and left a petition and letter at his door and emailed him. And we were very open on social media about what we were going through in our building, as a building who in the past 5 years has had 4 above guideline increases.
And so how much have the increases been? You can choose sort of the time frame, but by how much has your rent gone up?
So it's about 22% for the tenants who have been affected, and not every tenant is affected every single year by it. It depends on when you moved in. I have been here for about 19 years, so I've been affected by every above guideline increase we had. I've been in the unit I'm in since 2012, about 13 years, and my rent has jumped in that time frame more than $500.
I want to read a statement that we received from Dream Unlimited, the owner of your building. They noted that they acquired the building in 2021, so they are not responsible for the above guideline increases before that time. And I should point out for our audiences across the country, in Ontario, the government sets maximum guidelines on how much landlords are allowed to raise rents, which, you're referring to these guidelines. For example, in 2023, that rate is 2.5%. So if a landlord upgrades property, they can apply for one of these increases over that guideline. Here's a statement that the owners sent us. Any construction on site has been focused on ensuring the long-term viability and safety of the building. Much needed balcony restoration as well as new window and balcony door installation is currently underway and will be complete in the near future. The restoration of the balconies is critically necessary for the safety of our residents given the age of the building, as well as to ensure a sustainable and resilient building in the long term. So Sharlene, that is what the owners say. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction to that is that we have folks in the building who have been here for a long time. And right now it's a situation where they pay their rent or they eat. As a tenant association chairperson, everybody knows me. They know my name. They speak to me very confidently. And when I have a neighbor tell me in the elevator, if we don't win this, I can't be here anymore. I don't know where I'm going to go, because we are one of the lower priced buildings in the city of Toronto. what do? You want to fight. You want to fight for your neighbors. This is our home. We're raising our families here. We have seniors and pensioners who've lived there for the majority of their life and have raised their children and their families here. This is where we are and where we love to be. And I'm going to still fight for them. And we're going to still fight for each other. We're standing up together in unity and saying enough is enough. The cost of living has gone up, but our wages haven't increased. Our wages have remained the same. And many folks in our building are making less than they did pre-pandemic. They're working from home.
Charlene,
they've lost some wages. Go ahead.
Yeah, I always try to anticipate or kind of imagine as somebody's listening or watching the show what they might be thinking. I think a lot of people would be very sympathetic, especially with what you just said in your answer, but they might also say landlords, building owners face costs as well, and a rent strike, just refusing to pay rent, though a commendable goal to help people deal with rising costs, may lead to owners not being able to run their buildings properly, not being able to do improvements that they need to do, not be able to keep the heat on and the elevators running. What would you say to that?
I would say that Dream Limited is a major corporation that has publicly stated that 50% of their profit from rental units is 50% profit. So the expenditures that they're doing right now are balconies, the windows, things we haven't had for over a year. They can afford it. They bought this building knowing exactly what they were doing, buying into AGIs that already existed. And in all honesty, we had an above guideline increase on the year of the rent freeze, with Doug Ford announcing in 2021 there will be no raising in rent. Every unit that was affected in this building by a rent increase was an AGI. And people were shocked and flabbergasted and didn't understand, because all over the media was there's no rent increase in the province of Ontario due to the pandemic. We understand what people are going through and we're working with people. Well, this company did not do that. They still hit us with an above guideline increase. And we had to take the power back. We have to make sure that...
How is this going to end?
Well, hopefully we'll end with a negotiation. We meet at the table as we did in 2022 to have a negotiation about 2018 and have a negotiation with the lawyers and the corporation to go back and forth and not just hear no from our landlord, to hear some sort of resolution with our landlord. That's what we are hoping for here at 33 King.
Well, I wish you luck, Sharlene. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you, and have a great Sunday afternoon.
All right, you too. Sharlene Henry's a tenant at 33 King Street in Toronto, a building where roughly half the tenants are refusing to pay their rent. Our question on Cross Country Checkup today: how are sky-high rental prices affecting your life, and are rent strikes a step too far? You can call us at 1-888-416-8333 or go to cbc.ca/aircheck. All right, our next caller is in Grand Prairie, Alberta. Ben Chabot is on the line. Hi, Ben.
Hello, Ian.
What's your rental story?
Well, I don't have a huge rental story. I can relate probably a story that a lot of people in the country are going through right now. My wife and I have an adult child at home that cannot afford to move out because the rents are too high. And I think, and it's also, a lot of people in our social circle as well are going through the same thing. It's not creating a hardship. If my child can't get the job that he needs or she needs to get out of the house and start their life, we're helping by just providing a safe environment to at least stay so that they can get their life started.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. We heard from Airdrie, Alberta. Now you are in Grand Prairie, relatively small city in Alberta. And so even in Grand Prairie, rental costs are problematic. I guess they are for your son.
Well, they're not just problematic for my son. They're problematic for a lot of people. Real wages have not kept up with any type of real estate inflation in a meaningful way in the past 20 to 30 years in this country, which kind of takes me to my next sidebar here about the housing is governments, whether they're conservative or liberal, have done a really good job over the past 10 or 15 or 20 years convincing the Canadian public that our real estate woes are, because of the evil ma and pa investor or the evil real estate developer, when really there's been no meaningful social housing built in Canada for 30 years to increase the supply. I grew up in Edmonton in the 60s and 70s, and there were all kinds of social housing projects that either on the go or built to help with the housing situation back then. And now they've basically turned it over. They've created a regulatory environment where real estate is basically left unchecked. And real estate is one of the few commodities we have out there that strictly follows the laws of supply and demand. There really isn't a lot much else in the equation that dictates price. If you've got no supply and lots of demand, you're going to be paying high prices.
Ben, thank you very much for calling. And a couple of interesting things there. First of all, pointing out how widely this rent crisis is being felt, including in Grand Prairie, Alberta, but also raising the issue of social housing, which I feel like we're going to hear more about that as the show continues. Let's go back to an issue that we heard just before that call, and that is rent strikes. So we heard from a tenant, very organized, unhappy tenant about rent increases in her building, which she feels have been unfair, and so she's and a lot of other tenants are just refusing to pay their rents until they get a negotiation that makes them happy. Let's bring in someone now who represents landlords across Canada. John Dickie is the president of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations. So his organization represents smaller landlords and larger corporations like the ones involved in the rent strikes in Toronto. He is in Ottawa. Hi, John.
Hello. Nice to be on the show.
Yeah, nice to have you. Now, we're asking callers how to fix the rising cost of rent and whether rent strikes are a step too far. What's your answer to that question, particularly the second question?
Well, to deal with the first one first, though, there are two things that need to be done. We need more rental housing supply. Governments slow down the process of building with all kinds of red tape. They charge way too much in terms of development charges, in terms of soft costs that they impose on developers. The fundamental problem is that supply has not kept up with demand. And we're seeing demand shooting through the roof with Canada's population grew up by 1 million people last year. We needed 400,000 more homes, and we did not have 400,000 more homes. At most, we had 225,000 more homes. So this is fundamentally a supply problem, and it is fundamentally the responsibility of governments not getting their act together to coordinate immigration with housing supply. The second element to this, very briefly, is some people have incomes that are too low. And the problem isn't that they're paying rents that are too high. As Sharlene said, her building's a relatively low rent building, but there are people in there who can't afford that rent. Well, that's an income problem. And governments need to do a better job of helping people with very low incomes with their income so that they can afford the rent that they need, the housing that they need.
So you heard Charlene's frustration. You heard her describe the plight of some of her fellow tenants in that building, and you heard her say that's why they are just not paying their rent until they can negotiate a better deal. How do you feel about that strategy of rent strikes to get some action?
I think if it were to get action out of the government, that would be fine. If about either housing supply or about adjusting immigration until we can supply the housing. But they're not doing that. They're attacking the landlord. And the landlord did not cause this problem. The landlord is responding to supply and demand. Their rents are already held down by rent control, in Ontario especially. It is tight. AGIs are just one mitigating measure that means that the housing supply doesn't disappear entirely. We have to have AGIs if we're going to have the tight rent control guideline. The other thing I'd like to say about rent strikes is I think they're an attempt to clothe people in the notion that, this is like a labor strike. But a rent strike is quite different from a labor strike. In a labor strike, the worker doesn't provide their labor, doesn't work, and they don't get paid. It's two-sided. In a rent strike, the tenant continues to live in the apartment. They continue to enjoy the benefits of living, in the apartment. Their taxes are paid, the utilities are paid, the building continues to run, and yet they don't pay anything. It's entirely one-sided, and it's entirely unfair. So, our organization, as you can imagine, but landlords generally also don't think too much of rent strikes. And I can tell you the Landlord and Tenant Board of Ontario doesn't think too much of rent strikes either.
So what would you say to Sharlene?
I would say to Sharlene, she needs to try to get the government to support low-income renters better. The industry does that. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness does that. There are programs out there that the government could do to help in these situations. If AGIs are making it difficult for people to afford their rent, there should be a government legitimately. Then it would be very helpful if there were a government program that helped the renters who needed the help. Not everyone in the building needs the help. Sharlene says her wages haven't kept up with inflation, but most people's wages have, in fact, kept up with inflation. Even during the pandemic, lots of people were saying, how badly low-income people were off. Stats Canada studied the situation, and in fact, the income of low-income people, the lowest 1/5 of people, went up during the pandemic because CERB gave them more money than they'd earned before. That's clear from Stats Canada. During the pandemic, income inequality got less. Incomes didn't get more unequal; they got less unequal.
Yeah. All right, John. You make your point forcefully, and it's nice. Lots of perspectives out there, and it's good to have yours as well. Thank you very much, John Dickie, president of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations. He is in Ottawa.